all things are possible to God. We have in the collect itself an example of a prayer which probably goes back to the time of Gregory the Great, the Gregorian Sacramentary, for these collects in their origin are older than we think. And it is a reference to a time of trial which is easily understood at that period when we think of the political situation in Rome. Grant us, O Lord, we pray, that the course of our world may be directed by your peaceful rule, and that your church may rejoice, untroubled in her devotion. Gregory, having been prefect of Rome, was able, as Pope, to combine the political and the spiritual, and the only really stable point in a crumbling Roman world. So he was the man for the hour, and the church needed him, and the church needed also peace to worship God freely. We receive our prayers, our liturgy, our faith from those who have gone before us in the mists of history, and we respect what we have received. And it's good that we have this translation in the English now close to the Latin, so as to hear the power of the Latin coming through. And faith then acts according to the circumstances of every generation, and the Lord calls through those circumstances. He tailors his grace to the circumstance of each generation and each individual within his generation and each occasion within the life of the individual, because God is personal, and we have to do not with a societal, bodily, global impact alone, but with the relationship of one individual. And this is the thrust of the gospel. This young man who wants to know, and the Lord gives him the answer. He seems to know the answer already, and so he asks more. All these I have kept from my early days. What is there still? And the Lord then, having given the bottom line, the common way of salvation, keeping the commandments, which of course we can't avoid, then gives the evangelical counsels, if you will be perfect. Of course, he goes right to the real problem. Perfection in his case would mean detachment of the heart. And the problem in his case was specific. He was attached to what he had, and he went away sad. This call has come through the generations, and again the grace of God tailors itself to the occasion and the individual, within his time, within his place, within his present moment, his kairos, his favourable time. And this very verse has called more than once I can tell you, over the Christian centuries. We have already, in the case of Anthony, who in church heard this powerful message, and we know the impact. We have it also in the life of St. Francis of Assisi, and we know the impact there. A whole, we could say, evangelical movement in the correct understanding of the term, gospel movement, return to the simplicity, the radicality, living on providence, essentially. Well, that providence also was found by Anthony way back in the 3rd century. We have there what happened when he went into the bowels of the uninhabited desert. He thought, of course, he was the only one, and then what was his surprise when he was shown by a supernatural intuition that there was another one long before him there, Paul the hermit. And of course he got there, and Paul by then was an old man, and he hadn't seen anyone for years and years and years and years and years, and he wasn't known, Paul the hermit. And of course God wanted this good monk, Paul the hermit, to die with another fellow monk with him, and so he was able to be close to him. And we have, of course, what happened, transmitted to us by St. Athanasius, how when they encountered that day, providence of God multiplied the miracle, because normally a bird would arrive with half a loaf, but when Anthony was there, the bird came with a complete loaf, and they had to break it in two. But then this miracle of providence carried on in the whole life of that desert place. Grace grew in its effect, and that desert place was peopled, inhabited by holy men and women, but mainly men, and the impact was something else. And the miracles were again something else, again, and we have a very strange miracle going on till this day in one of the most ancient monasteries. A great figure down there was St. Macarius. Well, the monastery of St. Macarius has this miraculous spring, because water is life down there, and it gushed forth miraculously from the rock, and it still gushes forth miraculously from the rock, but it didn't stop there. Ever since, the quantity that has gushed forth is exactly tailored to the needs of the day. So it adjusts itself according to the number of monks to be watered, and the ground, of course, has to be also watered. And it also, right to this day, does the same, adjusting itself day by day to the number of pilgrims who come, because now there are more pilgrims than before because of the opening of a road system. And so it can be seen clearly on YouTube. Beautiful crystal clear water, as at St. Winifred's Well in Wales, the same thing with regard to the miracle ever going on, and always clear and pure, crystal, and in that case healing. And so the arm of the Lord was never shortened, and the grace of God is there, personal, adjusting itself to the individual and the situation, showing all the time that God cares. And even here in the Hermitage, I have noticed this miracle for many years now. I never ever have to buy food. It always just arrives, just the right amount, at the right time, out of the blue. And the same also with financial assistance. Exactly the right sum at the right time. It's just a perpetual miracle. God cares for his own. But then, how God calls. I was just talking this morning on the phone to a close friend who was involved with vocation work elsewhere in Ireland, and she was commenting how the Dominicans were getting vocations, as were the missionaries of the Blessed Sacrament, at the cost, quite often, of various dioceses, because the young people draw young people, and authenticity of praise and worship and fellowship draws. The liturgy attracts, and people need that consolation, and we find our invisible friends, the angels, with us at the altar as we create beauty and suggestion for God. We're not Protestants. We don't have to have that austerity of just the head, words. We can have beauty. We can be rocked in the bosom of God with beauty, with the angels next to us, happy to hear the sound. And young men can produce it very well. And also the senses can be used to honour God, all five senses, including even the nose. Incense, suggestion, the beyond, the unutterable suggested with what we can use, the poetry of gratuitous praise. Now, with regard to the ways in which God therefore can call, it can happen therefore in a personal way through, for instance, a word heard about whatever order might be attractive. Another person might have gone there and talked about it. We go and we are also beautifully caught up. It's so different to go to a place where there are young people there compared with going to a place where one is the only one in the novitiate. It's discouraging to go to a place where eventually one will have to look after old people. Growing up with other young people is something else. Being ordained with other people is something else. One shares that blissful moment, and one has support in loneliness. That explains many things about the disasters that we have out there. I remember, actually, in our own case at Sant'Antimo, getting testimonies of the effect of something else with regard to the way that grace could tailor itself to use something to get to somebody specifically in time and place. Well, it was the very building. People would come into that church, which had something miraculous about it, and they would be bowled over. I'd hear their remarks sometimes. It was amazing when they came in and they were struck. There was incense in the air every day, because we had incense at High Mass every morning, and the whole impact of the building, the altar was massive. It just worked. And of course there was a miraculous crucifix there. When that was removed years ago, forcefully to be put in a museum, whatever it was, there was the Lord's intervention. Earthquakes, earth tremors, all the time between there and where it was, all the time it wouldn't stop. It's down in the archives of the area, we know it's true, and it would only stop when eventually they brought the crucifix back, and there it is, right now, before everyone at the other end of the church, behind the high altar. And before that we would celebrate in Latin with incense every day, and the acoustics were something else. But that also goes back to another miracle. It was how it was built in the first place. It goes back to 781, and we know what happened there. Charles the Great was in the area with his army, Charlemagne, and the army was being decimated by a plague. And he prayed, and he was told by an angel to take a plant which he would find in the area, which ever since is called after him, Carolina, and to make with it an infusion and to give it to his troops, to which he did, and they were healed and spared. And he promised to build a monastery there, and that's how it came to be. And they got relics from Rome, of Sant'Antimo, a martyr who had been martyred twice over, because the first time he was brought to the surface of the Tiber by an angel. The second time he was brutally martyred. So they got his relics, and that's how it's called Sant'Antimo. But the miracle was the origin. And the Lord knows how to choose a place which actually is very beautiful and in itself heals. For when one builds a place on a beautiful spot of His and keeps it pure, then many things work on the soul. We do not need to complicate things that much. And so it is that one day a young man was coming into that church, and he sort of heard this when he had the impact of that glorious place. Questa è la mia casa. This is my home. And he became a novice with us, and he persevered. So, even that can be used by divine providence. The Lord is not short of means of calling, but one big one, and I end here, is what one finds. Grace passing also through humanity, transmitted by love. For it is not enough to have divine grace and to leave it, as it were, in abstraction and in mid-air. We need to express it amongst ourselves, and there where there is fellowship, there is a natural warmth and attraction. I remember hearing this. It was actually in print. It was people being asked why they came into this and this monastery. It was actually a pre-Constitution monastery in California, St. Michael's Abbey. Many young people. And a young person had been there on a camp run by them, one summer vacation, and he'd said, "Here there is joy, and I want it."